The three things that I was raised in: motorcycles, automobiles, and music, are things that I am fortunate enough to be able to continue doing. Counting Cars, which was hosted by Danny Koker, used to have everything from roaring engines to jaw-dropping customs, and the cast and crew were so close that they felt like a family. On the other hand, things were not always what they appeared to be behind the scenes, and not every member of the team remained in active participation. One by one, well-known characters disappeared from the show, and there was neither an explanation nor a farewell. Certain individuals quietly departed, while others were compelled to leave, and a few individuals left behind rumors that never quite vanished. After the camera stopped rolling, what exactly took place inside the customs department of the Count? In addition, why did several members of the team leave the show while it was at its most successful points? Could it have been pressure, treachery, or something completely different? The reality would unquestionably alter your perspective on counting automobiles for the rest of your life. A look at the rise of Danny Koker and the counting of cars. The stakes were higher for Danny Koker and Counting Cars than they were for any other company, because when your empire is built on custom builds and dedicated employees, even a slight crack may send everything crashing down. This is because every business has its ups and downs. Danny Koker has always been particularly cautious when it comes to the obstacles and tensions that arise in his garage. This is due to the fact that Count Customs is not just any business. Rather, it is his lifelong dream endeavor. And long before he became the face of one of the most successful reality shows on cable television, Danny Koker was simply a boy with a goal and a passion for restoring automobiles, improving them, and giving them attitude. He took his passion for vehicles to the next level by giving them attitude. Having been born in Cleveland, Ohio, and having spent his childhood in Detroit, Michigan, Koker's formative years were profoundly shaped by the city that was the birthplace of the automobile industry in the United States. He was born and raised in Detroit. The city was more than just a location he called home. And unlike the majority of children, Danny did not have to wait until he was an adult before he began working on automobiles. Not only was his father, Danny Koker Sr., a musician, but he was also somebody who had a passion for automobiles. During his career, the elder Koker was a member of illustrious ensembles such as the Cathedral Quartet and the Rex Humbert Family Singers. However, when he was at home, he would spend a significant amount of time in the garage with his brother. The garage was transformed into Danny's very first classroom. In addition, by the time Danny was a teenager, he was already repairing automobiles and giving them a fresh narrative at the same time. Car culture was not the only thing that Danny Koker covered. In the early 1990s, he began to cultivate a local following in Las Vegas by assuming the role of Count Coolrider, a late-night horror movie host on a local television station. He presented B-movies that had a rock and roll element that stood out, and he did so while wearing leather sunglasses and a bandana that was his signature. However, the most significant thing was that it provided Danny with a platform and experience working with television. It was campy and enjoyable. However, when he finally established his own garage, which he called Count's Customs, it was never intended to be merely an empire until much later. In point of fact, Danny established the garage and did so for pragmatic reasons. In order to get work done on his own rides, he required a location where he would not be required to participate in a queue. However, what started off as a modest custom garage buried away in a secluded industrial area of Las Vegas gradually grew into something far larger. Almost immediately, attention was drawn to Danny's approach, which consisted of classic restorations with a rebellious edge. Along with his team, he transformed ordinary automobiles into works of art, and as a result, word quickly spread about the Count's traditions. Then came the break that put everything into a new perspective. It was in the latter part of the 2000s that Pawn Stars made their debut on the History Channel. This show was situated in Las Vegas, and it featured the Harrison family as the proprietors of the gold and silver pawn business. Additionally, Danny Koker was featured on the show on a regular basis as an expert on automobiles and motorcycles. Every time he stepped into the business, people wanted more of him because they quickly detected his edge, his humor, and his credibility. In 2012, Counting Cars made its debut as a spin-off series by virtue of the fact that the producers had also observed. The entirety of the show was devoted to Danny Count's customs and the insane custom creations that were always coming into and leaving his garage. Restoration of historic automobiles was not the only focus of the show. It was about the people who were behind the machines, they were loyal, and they had a vision. There was a different project presented in each episode. The transformation of a beat-up Mustang into a spectacle and the reimagining of a Harley Davidson with flames and chrome are just two examples. On the other hand, the enthusiastic and perfectionist Danny was the driving force behind everything. He never refrained from striving for something more desirable. There was an instant connection between the audience and the show. And by the time it reached its third season, Counting Cars had established itself as one of the most popular shows on the History Channel. Not only did it succeed in terms of the drama or the bespoke jobs, but it also succeeded in terms of its authenticity. This wasn't a performance of artificial tension or rehearsed mayhem. Actual mechanisms, actual builds, and actual stakes were involved in this. Despite his own speed, Danny Koker did not slow down. Outside of the show, his personal automobile collection expanded to include more than 100 vehicles, each of which was meticulously restored with the same level of attention to detail that he demanded at his shop. His unique rock and roll style was used into a number of different commercial enterprises that he was involved in. As a result of his efforts, Count's Vamped Rock Bar became a popular destination for people who are interested in classic cars and live music. In order to connect with the body art culture of Las Vegas, he established Count's Tattoo Company. For a time, he even led a band called Count 77, combining his passion for music with his great presence on stage. The strain, however, came. Along with all of that achievement, particularly when the expectations inside Count's conventions became higher than they had ever been before, the team that Danny assembled had to be able to keep up with a global audience, strict deadlines, and projects that were worth many millions of dollars. The stakes were no longer simply about finishing a car on time. Rather, they encompassed the protection of the brand, which was something that not everyone was capable of doing. Not only did Counting Cars become known for its unique builds over the course of its history, but it also became known for its abrupt employee departures, bitter fallouts, and a revolving door of employees who simply were unable to live up to the standard that Danny had established. There were a few of these employees that were terminated, while others vanished without any formal notification, and the fans were aware of this fact. What are some of the names that Danny Koker has managed to keep at a distance over the course of multiple years? That exactly are the employees that were not selected for the position? Behind the scenes, there is a lot of stress and drama. Fans who watched the race from the comfort of their own homes always believed that Counting Cars was the ideal combination of emotion and horsepower. Classic rides, custom rebuilds, and a close-knit crew that appeared to be nothing more than a group of friends doing what they loved were all part of the experience. However, if you were to pull back the curtain, you would find that things were quite different as they were being done behind the scenes. It was a stressful situation, there was a strain on creativity, and the personalities didn't always blend. Well, the reason for this is that as the concert grew in size, it became increasingly difficult to ensure that everything ran well. In addition, it is regrettable that not everyone was built for it. When counting automobiles, the reality of manufacturing was one of the factors that contributed to the tension that was there. Although each episode of the show might only be shown for a total of 30 minutes on air, the projects themselves were everything but short-term investments. We were dealing with real automobiles that had real problems, and each and every construction had to be up to Danny Koker's stringent standards. In order to do this, months of labor were required, including deconstructing frames, custom welding, reupholstering interiors, and searching for rare parts, with the purpose of painting everything to perfection. The reality show Counting Cars made it a point to be truthful to the task. in contrast to other reality shows that twist the truth in order to achieve quick results. There was a code for that. In addition, what you witnessed on the TV was a condensed version of reality, but it was not a fantasy that had been manufactured. Without fail, the constructions were genuine, the repairs were genuine, and the amount of pressure that was placed on them to be completed was incredible. Nevertheless, the transformation of cats is not the only thing that goes into the making of television. Counting Cars' production crew was aware of the fact that the show is built on suspense from the beginning. The work that was done in the garage was genuine. Yet the manner in which it was edited frequently escalated minor disagreements into big conflicts. Long days were made to appear as though they were a last-minute scramble, conversations were cut off in the middle, and deadlines were highlighted. And as time went on, fractures started to appear as a result of that type of attention. Danny was in charge of maintaining order within Count's Customs. It was quality that he was preoccupied with. Every automobile that was sold from his business had his name, his reputation, and frequently a price tag that was in the six-figure range. That meant there was no place for laziness, no room for shortcuts, and no room for half measures. Those workers who did not demonstrate the same degree of dedication as he did were either pressured to improve their performance or fired entirely. For a team, that level of intensity may either make or break them. The pressure increased in tandem with the growth of the show. Only more fuel was added to the flames by fame. What began as a family-run business has all of a sudden become a well-known brand on a global scale. There were millions of people watching the show. The garage began to see an influx of visitors from abroad. Signs were requested by the fans. Customers demanded times that were impossible to meet. Who are the staff members? While some people were able to exhibit humility in the face of the spotlight, others were unable to. Throughout the shop, there were instances of egos, rivalries, and situations in which the tension had nothing to do with the automobiles and everything to do with personalities coming into conflict with one another. Some employees started to feel like they were on television, while others became resentful of those who took up the most of the screen time. In the past, the same individuals who would joke about while getting their oil changed were suddenly being micked up, monitored, and occasionally misrepresented on national television. This kind of atmosphere has the ability to alter people. For several members of the team, the situation did not improve in any way. There were also legal and financial issues that Count's Customs had to deal with behind the scenes, and these issues started to become more apparent as the play progressed. It is possible for mistakes to become costly when you are restoring high-value vehicles for rich customers, as you are frequently working under strict deadlines and being scrutinized by the public. Furthermore, with regard to Count's Customs, there were conflicts regarding alterations, delays in delivery, and arguments regarding estimations, and some of these disagreements were brought before the court. Danny Koker and his company's reputation took a hit as a result of certain situations that were brought to light, despite the fact that the majority of those difficulties were resolved in a private manner. Danny found this to be more than just a source of frustration. It was a timely reminder that there are times when achievement comes with legal repercussions tied to it. At the point in the show that it reached its climax, the tension had already developed into something more substantial. One employee in particular ended up in a court struggle with Danny Koker, which was the embezzlement issue that Joseph Frontiera was involved in. Other employees began missing work, while others made poor decisions with their finances. Employees who are quiet, who do not create a lot of noise, and who are rarely seen in front of the camera are present in every workplace. These employees are the ones who stay in the background. On the other hand, there are instances when the people you least anticipate are the ones who wind up causing the most damage. That individual was Joseph Frontiera, and he appeared on Counting Cars. Frontiera was not only another member of the crew, despite the fact that the majority of viewers probably did not even remember his face. Without a doubt, he was not airbrushing flames or welding frames. He was dealing with something that was significantly more delicate, the money. For the purpose of managing payroll, keeping track of spending, and ensuring that Counts Customs maintained a financially healthy operation behind the scenes. Frontiera was brought on board as the company's bookkeeper. She was employed. The importance of his work cannot be overstated in a company that specialized in high-end custom projects and budgets that were in the thousands of dollars. On the other hand, in the year 2016, the calm accountant unexpectedly became the focal point of a quite loud debate. According to the paperwork submitted with the court, Danny Koker's shop, Counts Customs, had filed a complaint against Joseph Frontiera, accusing him of stealing more than $75,000 from the company. Furthermore, this was not merely a matter of rounding errors or a slight overspending of funds. These assertions were very specific, detailed, and severe in nature. According to the allegations made in the lawsuit, Frontiera had improperly used the cash provided by the company to meet personal expenses. These expenses included a substantial down payment on a Range Rover as well as many airline tickets for private travel. In addition to allegedly stealing money, he allegedly attempted to conceal the fact that he had stolen it, which made the claims even more serious. It was alleged in the lawsuit that he had forged Danny's signature on a number of documents and deliberately misrepresented financial records in a manner that would make it more difficult to identify the theft. This came as a complete and utter shock to a business that took great pleasure in its commitment to trust, loyalty, and blue-collar values. There was more to Counts Customs than just a garage. In the eyes of Danny and his gang, it was a family. At least, that's how they perceived it. Furthermore, it was not just unprofessional for someone in a position of responsibility to betray that trust in such a clear manner. It was also a personal offense. The bookkeeper was not the only person that Danny blamed for the situation. The hiring firm that was responsible for placing Frontiera in the post was also implicated in the case. Randstad USA, Inc. It was alleged that the organization had neglected to conduct an adequate background check on Frontiera or reveal any problems that he had experienced in his former position. In essence, Counts Customs claimed that Randstad had sent them a ticking time bomb and then walked away from the situation without carrying out any consequences. The lawsuit was widely reported, particularly among those who were fans of the show. The viewers were taken aback. No one anticipated that the crew would be involved in an embezzlement controversy, despite the fact that counting automobiles had always been a source of tension in the business and the occasional personality dispute. When it came to drama, it was the kind that didn't require editing in order to feel dramatic. But if you pay close attention to the show, you'll notice that Frontiera's departure was handled with a stillness that is almost uncanny. No conflict took place in front of the camera. Danny did not provide an explanation, and there was no last farewell. Simply put, he vanished from the series without leaving any traces behind. There was a continuous progression of the show, and the builds proceeded. The audience was left to piece together the information based on the court papers and the reports that were published in the media. What made the whole thing even more peculiar was the fact that Frontiera was able to disappear completely from the public eye. On the other hand, Joseph Frontiera entirely disappeared from the public eye, in contrast to other former cast members who later appeared on social media or in interviews. After the lawsuit was brought to light, it was as if he had completely wiped himself from existence. No one can determine for certain whether that was done on purpose or simply a reflection of the legal quagmire he was stuck in. Both possibilities are possible. Regarding the legal case itself, the records that are available to the public suggest that the issue was eventually brought before the court system. However, a significant number of the conclusive elements are still kept secret or are not resolved. In the eyes of the public, Danny Koker never issued a public statement regarding the incident, and the fact that he did not do so speaks loudly about the seriousness with which Counts Customs handled the situation. Considering that Danny is a man who is known for his large personality and his passion for telling stories, it is possible that his decision to remain silent about Frontiera was his way of drawing a line. It's possible that he didn't want to give the issue any more attention, or perhaps For someone who is so strongly committed to loyalty, the betrayal simply cut too deep to be spoken. The deeds of Joseph Frontiera, however, have left an indelible mark on the customs of the Count. This is a fact that cannot be disputed. This was not just about the money that was stolen. It was also about the breach of trust that occurred. In addition, Danny Koker, who has established his entire brand on the principles of respect, passion, and workmanship, finds it difficult to recover from a wound of this nature. On the other hand, Frontiera was not the only departure that caused shock and surprise. In spite of the fact that his account was the most legally explosive, there were other people who left the shop under different conditions that were less clear. Some of them had a disagreement with Danny, while others were unable to adjust to the newfound popularity. However, the departure of a man who was well liked by viewers due to his aggressive tone of voice and no-nonsense demeanor was possibly one of the most surprising staff departures of the show. He was a guy who seemed to live and breathe the garage life, and he was an initial member of the team where the crew was assembled. However, at some point in time throughout the process, something altered, and his departure resulted in the same number of questions as it did silence. The unexpected departure of Jones, Scott Jones, was the person who was responsible for maintaining order and orderliness throughout the early seasons of Counting Cars, in spite of the fact that Danny Koker was the most important person in the business and the rest of the staff was mostly concerned with turning wrenches and spraying paint. Scott was the one who was responsible for monitoring budgets, enforcing timetables, and occasionally dismissing requests. In a garage that was teeming with creative people, Scott was the enforcer. When his first 2 seasons, Scott served as the shop manager and bookkeeper when counting automobiles. He did not have a warm personality or a showy manner that won over fans. In addition to being forthright and focused on numbers, it was obvious that he was more concerned with safeguarding the bottom line than he was with entertaining the audience. The result was that he was divisive. In spite of this, his presence was absolutely necessary, at least in the beginning. In a business where the construction of a custom car might cost tens of thousands of dollars and deadlines were constantly approaching, it was Scott's numerous on-air confrontations with Danny that contributed to the heated nature of his role. Despite the fact that Danny frequently made judgments that were influenced by his emotions and gut instincts, such as approving expensive parts or giving the go-ahead for impromptu redesigns, Scott was the person who consistently brought him back to reality. Those who watched it did so multiple times. There was a warning from Scott that a project was going over budget or behind schedule, and Danny was pushing back rather forcefully at times. Because of the antagonism that existed between them, the chemistry on set was not always simple to achieve. On the other hand, Scott vanished without much of a prior warning. After the conclusion of the 2nd season, he is no longer seen on the show. A send-off, an official explanation on television, and an emotional farewell were all absent from the arrangement. And there is only quiet. In addition, as was to be expected, the fans started asking questions and rumors started to circulate about the situation. It was claimed that Scott had been caught mismanaging money or perhaps stealing from the company, according to some rumors. Contrary to the situation with Joseph Frontiera, however, no accusations were ever brought against him. A public lawsuit, a police complaint, and an official accusation have not been filed against Scott, and there is no evidence that links him to any form of criminal behavior. From a legal point of view, his exit was completely clean. The sole explanation that was ever provided was that Scott relocated to Tennessee in order to be in closer proximity to his family, and it is to his credit that he ended up at that particular location. Currently, Scott Jones is the proprietor of Koker's Extreme Automotive, which is located in Roan Mountain, Tennessee. This high-performance company specializes in the restoration, repair, and custom builds of automobiles. In more recent years, he has even made a comeback on the reality show Swap Shop, which is shown on Netflix and is about treasure hunters and collectors in tiny towns around the United States. Danny has not made any comments regarding the real reasons behind Scott's departure from Counting Cars, and Scott has never publicly discussed his time on the show, despite the rumors that have been circulating around. It is not known whether the tension that was present behind the scenes just reached a point where it became too much, or whether there were deeper conflicts regarding finances. Both men appeared to be ready to part ways after 2 intense seasons, and neither of them looked back. This is something that is very evident. On the other hand, if Scott's departure appeared to be sudden, the subsequent one was much more perplexing. Because in contrast to Scott, the next name was not a manager or a money guy. He was a fan favorite who was well known for his accent, his jokes, and his boundless energy. And then, all of a sudden, he disappeared. This is Rolly Sabo. There is a good chance that you are familiar with Rolly Sabo if you have watched even a few episodes of Counting Cars. Not only was he the shop's detailer, but he was also the comic relief. He was sometimes referred to as Rock and Rolly. Rolly stood out in every scene thanks to his heavy Hungarian accent, his enormous personality, and his infectious laugh from beginning to end. Rolly was the kind of man who could make the garage feel like a party wherever he went, whether he was polishing chrome, vacuuming interiors, or cracking jokes with Kevin and Danny, but there was genuine talent hiding behind the jokes. As the lead detailer, Rolly was the one who was accountable for ensuring that each and every finished vehicle had an impeccable appearance, either before it was returned to the customer or before it was shown to the camera. While he was in charge, smudges, fingerprints, and dust were never allowed to escape his control. Despite the fact that Danny regularly complimented his performance, he took his job quite seriously. The fans adored him, and his popularity continued to rise with each passing season. Nevertheless, this is the reason why his absence was much more perplexing. Over the course of the 2nd through 6th seasons, Rolly made frequent appearances. And then, without any further ado, he vanished. There was no comment from the remaining members of the crew, nor was there any explanation or farewell scene. And as is customary, the quiet served simply to nourish the rumors. There were reports that Rolly had a disagreement with other members of the staff. Some people muttered that he had been sacked because he had a disagreement with the production team or had been late an excessive number of times. In 2017, allegations circulated that Rolly's trailer, which contained detailing tools and equipment worth thousands of dollars, had been stolen. This was the most alarming theory that emerged at that time. Several local Las Vegas news sites have confirmed that the heist was a real occurrence. Rolly made a quick message on social media about the incident, expressing her obvious frustration and heartbreak during the post. However, following that, there was complete and utter stillness. The fact that there was no subsequent legal turmoil is an intriguing fact. There was no legal action taken against Rolly, and neither Danny nor the team made any public complaints or filed any charges against him. If there was a conflict, it may have been internal, and it may have remained that way. This seems to be the more plausible scenario. A few of admirers are of the opinion that Rolly made the decision to leave after the theft, because he was sick of the routine and eager to begin something of his own. To put it another way, he did just that. Rock and Rolly Custom Detailing is a mobile detailing service that Rolly Sabo established as his own company as a mobile detailing service situated in Las Vegas. Even though he is no longer on television, he continues to work on automobiles, and by all accounts, he is quite good at what he does. His business has a devoted customer base, and his reputation for doing work with painstaking attention to detail has not diminished. In the same way that many other people who left counting vehicles have done, Rolly has remained silent about the true reason behind his departure. The next name, however, is one that has caused a great deal of alarm among viewers of the show, the Aikau Shannon. There is a possibility that Shannon Aikau was the member of the Counting Cars crew who received the least amount of recognition. He was comp